So let's give a big warm welcome to Mark Beasley.
Cool. Thank you. All right. First I'd like to say thanks to Rachel and Julie for the invitation to come here and their kind hosting. I had one of the best meals a man who's had 2 teeth extracted could ever have last night. So that was fantastic. Thanks everybody for coming out on a glorious morning as opposed to yesterday morning. And also, it was great yesterday to visit with some of the artists that are in the studios here. It's good. It's always good meeting new artists. It keeps you mentally agile, and I kind of needed that workout, I think, a little bit. I also wanted to urge everybody to go to Natalia Slinko's show tonight. Is it called the Goat Farm Ranch Art Center? That's like the best. That's like the best title for any art center. Anyway, it's a fantastic show. It's amazing. I didn't know Natalia's work, or Slinko, she likes to be called. She's from Brooklyn, so it takes me coming to Atlanta to meet somebody who lives 6 blocks from me. That's how that works. So today, I have 213 slides. It's going to be a 3-hour retrospective of me. It's not. I'm going to keep it to well below an hour, and then we might have a Q&A at the end. My tombstone, Julie pointed this out, that this was kind of weird to start with, so she put the other flashcard up. This is just to remind me that I'm talking about projects from the last 10 years, and largely it kind of suggests how I moved, how I ended up in the world of performance, I guess. Which isn't something, it's actually, that's kind of wrong. It's something that I started with as a kid. I was in bands, but for a long time, I think 15, 20 years, I kind of, you know, when you're 16 and you haven't made it, you think it's over or something. So a lot of my friends signed record labels. I went to art school, which is the reverse of what normally happens. And so I'd kind of put performance aside, and it was something that I did. I went to see a lot of bands and music. And then I guess slowly over time I came back to that idea and started to think about this space, this event time, this space of performance, and what that kind of meant to me and how it was kind of central to the way I thought about the affect of art, if we can call it that. So I wanted to start with a project that was both a glorious failure but also glorious. In 2003, a project with an arts group, public arts group in the north of England, in the Lake District called Grisdale Arts. It's a residency program. I studied as an artist painting, then I moved to sound and image. I won't go through my whole deal, it'd be kind of weird. But I started as an artist, and then I moved back to my hometown, Birmingham, where there weren't a lot of galleries, there weren't a lot of spaces for friends to show. And I started curating and organizing exhibitions, which became kind of fascinating to me, the kind of dynamic of how you set up a space where works speak to each other, you can tell a certain story, and an audience gets to see what you do. So I kind of followed curating to a curating course in London at the Royal College of Art, and inversely, curating forced me to look back at what it was to be an artist. I was kind of like somehow... nostalgic is absolutely the wrong word, but I started to think about this free space of what it was to claim the position of artist and what you could do with that. So I started this group with my brother and a friend who's a writer, and we organized different exhibits. We were kind of like a nomadic project curatorially. Overheads or budget was always super low, so we had no fixed space, and we would travel around and we would do these shows around Britain mainly and some parts of Europe. And we were invited by Grisdale Arts to think through a touring show throughout Britain that basically went to towns that had no, obviously, immediate cultural centers. So they didn't have an art gallery, they didn't have a library, they didn't have a bookstore. These were the kind of neglected parts of Britain where money had been pooled. And we were thinking through how one would create a space for artists to engage with and for an audience to engage with these things that were happening in the locality, but also things that we could bring with us, like a kind of weird traveling art circus. So it's called Roadshow. It happened for a month throughout Britain. my brother's an architect, so we worked together and we designed this like 30 meters, do you have anyway, this big space that was both a venue, like a stage. We could project movies in there. Part of it opened out and it became a bookstore. There were these sound systems that people could use, make their own music. And we held Battle of the Band contests. A lot of our residency time at Grisdale Arts, which is a very rainy part of Britain, was spent in bars. We call them pubs. That's what we do. And a lot of that kind of conversation that came out of that was with young people drink in Britain when they're 16, 17. It's unlike here. It's terrible. It's terrible. So there were a lot of young guys in pubs who were in bands but had nowhere to play. So our first thought was to create this stage for different bands that we'd found in different areas. And we staged this very familiar cultural thing to me, which was Battle of the Bands. It's how a lot of friends of mine got signed at a very early age out of this small town called Stourbridge in Birmingham. And we'd all done Battle of the Bands shows, and that's how we got known by local radio stations. So we did these Battle of the Bands projects. This is the band, and I'm going to cut to it a little bit because we're 3 slides in and I'm 8 minutes in. That's kind of weird. So this band in particular is Zenolith, who are a black metal band from a rainy forest in Britain. Hadn't really played out, but they were pretty amazing. And the kind of what they were gifted when they won the prize was a video made by an artist called Olaf Brunig. And as a consequence, they've got a record label. That's kind of by the by. I hear them every now and again. But we were very interested in how you could create a platform for art in a space that didn't necessarily have that. And also kind of quite embattled communities where nobody really gave a damn about these kids. They were kind of running around crazy, smashing stuff up, waiting for things to happen. We also programmed and brought with us a bunch of other bands. This is a group called Juno Projects, and their music is made from the kind of destruction of technology. So mobile phones they set on fire and record, vinyl LPs that they destroyed by the needle, and all their music, their creativity comes from a form of destruction, which is an old situationist, calm, first wave British punk idea that destroy in order to create. We had what would one call him? We had a silent guy that traveled around with us as well, this guy that actually just said nothing, but people sat with him and told him everything. And for a month he didn't speak, which is interesting because Graham, the short guy staring at the guy with the fiddle or guitar, is one of the most verbose people I know. But it was we were kind of interested in different kinds of spectacle, but also these kind of quiet internal suggestions of what to think could mean. We said crazy projects. This is the world's worst stuntman. This is the Blauner Vista Social Club, which was by an artist called Bedwyr Williams. This is again by Juno Projects, where kids created their own version of rave tracks. They could pick and choose different sound samples, but they wrote their own lyrics. Some of them are absolutely amazing. I swear the Aphex Twins ripped most of them up. And this is how many people it took to tour for 4 months. So we went to Scotland, Wales, England. There was a plan to go to Ireland, but then this happened. And this for me was it's a kind of shocking, but not really. But it made me think a lot of the projects that I'd done up until that point were very kind of community-led. And I pulled a bunch of images out of this that normally kind of lead up to this thing. Pictures of kids just looking like confused, lost in a field in the middle of Wales. Nobody cares about them. And basically what we found when we got there was these communities actually needed some other kind of support. And we as artists were being asked to be social workers. That's how we got money to do this project. But in a way, we hadn't caused these problems. And we kind of felt that our role was so fleeting that I myself personally wanted to rethink how I kind of engage with art. So for 10 years prior to that, I'd done a lot of socially engaged projects with communities. And I'm still very interested in that, but for a short while, I kind of felt like I had to feed myself, for want of a a term. This was basically the kids. The kids loved what we did. They kind of hung out with us all day. In the end, we found out we just had to play football with them for 6 hours. That's what we did. That was our moment of engagement. You know, nobody listened to what these kids had to say. The one moment they rejected was the education tent. All arts projects have an education element, and the kids set fire to that tent. So it was this kind of like fitting end to this weird traveling circus called Roadshow. So I retreated to the ivory tower of, no, I didn't retreat to ivory. I just returned to some kind of situation that was less about a kind of community out there, but a community that used different centers. So it was a kind of active way to engage with space that already existed and communities that already existed. So this is the South Place Ethical Society in London. It's the first place that George Orwell rode parts of the road to Wigan Pier, which for socialists is a key text. And I was very interested in how one accesses these spaces with the thoughts and ideas of art. So this was a project. I was invited by an organization called Bookworks in London to do a series of activated versions of books or publications or book launches, so to speak. I was there for a year as a guest curator. So I worked with, I think, throughout the time, like 6 or 7 artists. And this, I guess, was the start of a long-term interest, which is in the voice in performance. So voice as material, like brass, paint, lead, steel. Voice is something that's malleable, especially now with the digital era. You can bend it, it can crack, it can break. So I kind of followed this for 10 years. I'll get to that. But I guess there are more personal reasons that I don't normally talk about. The voice, but somebody last night mentioned it's good when you get personal about what you do. I was like, yeah, sometimes it's good. So there are a number of reasons. I guess in Britain, voice is the biggest tell of position and class you can have in a culture. I'm from Birmingham, which on a list of BBC accents not to have is number 2. Liverpool's number 1, which is actually my favorite accent. So I started to think about how voice as material walks in the room before you do. So I was interested in people that had kind of changed their accents or stayed with them. I've still got some version of my accent, but it's not as strong as it was. I was in bands as a kid, as a vocalist, but then also my mother is an evangelical. Did the mic cut out? So I was thinking about what it was to convert to. He's also a teacher, so there was all these things kind of going on, and some of my heroes within culture were vocalists. So there were all these things that kind of drew me towards this subject, I guess, which has become more and more every week. I guess I'm looking for it. I'm writing a PhD on this subject as well, so I see more and more shows where it's people are thinking through the voice as material. I guess we all have a voice. We all use it. We're familiar with it. It's one thing we can talk about and have some understanding of. But it all started here with Bookworks, with these projects. This is a book by an artist called Mark Titchener. It's called Why and Why Not. And it was kind of like an evangelical rant about art and culture. It was played out at the Ethical Society through this megaphone. And that started the evening. Here are some of Mark's graphics. He's a London-based artist. And so it kind of looked at the book launch in the way that you might present a concert. This is a project by an artist called Bonnie Camplin. And this is one of her first works. It was called After the Power Cut. And it kind of looked at, it was kind of looking at a kind of burgeoning internet's culture and imagining a time beyond that, a post-digital, pre-digital, so to speak. She did a performance. But I guess this guy is the most key for me. This is an artist called Mark Leckey. He won the Turner Prize. He wouldn't have thanked me for leading with that, because they all get that. Turner Prize winner, but it's shorthand for he's somebody. Beyond that, he's somebody that I kind of connect. He's from Liverpool. Maybe it's an accent thing. I've worked with on and off, I guess, for the last 10 years, and he's somebody that I connect with through his kind of use of subcultural coding, his interest in pop music, his interest in kind of a broader take on popular culture, but how one brings that into, I guess, the gallery somehow, as he's managed to do. So he formed a band for this event called Jack to Jack, and he did this lecture that combined two texts, a film called Quadrophenia and a book by Graham Greene called The Destructors, which was about a bunch of kids in South London who, post the Second World War, it's kind of slightly factual, kind of spent months and months destroying certain houses as a way to rethink through their landscape. So it connects this kind of history of quadrophenia, mod culture, which is working class culture in Britain, and how they kind of show and tell what they're about through different style codes that wouldn't necessarily pick up unless you're part of that tribe. So it's a way of kind of signaling to people that you think certain things, but it's not understood by everybody else. And in a way that kind of mirrors some conversation around art, I guess. So he did an event, Jack to Jack formed. After that, he put out a number of LPs. But in essence, each of these things were lectures. So he's interested in how you go to an ethical society and you rethink through a presentation of a lecture. So it's a pop concert, as in the case of Mark, and a talk about these key texts that he's looking at. This is another work, I'm going to skip through it, by John Russell, a series of poster works that are all pages from a book that were posted around London, week pasted here, we call them fly posted. So slowly over time you pick up the chapters of these books. There was a launch of the books in a former strip club in the East End of London, which is now, I think, the bougiest restaurant you can go to, but at the time, nobody wanted to go to this bar. Here's Gustav Metzger at the front. Actually, a lot of people turned up for this when I think about it. They had two films that were screening as well, both about text, Art and Languages, 9 Gross and Conspicuous Errors, where they kind of sing pop songs with Red Crayola. And then Lawrence Wiener's A Bit of Matter and a Little Bit More. His kind of porn movies with Catherine Bigelow, where he stages his key texts. Lawrence Wiener was part of the project. I asked Lawrence if I could remix his 2 albums that he'd made with Ned Sublette, who's a kind of Mex punk musician from New York from the 70s. He kindly agreed, and then I invited a number of different musicians to remix this text. I was interested in how Lawrence's, one of the things that he restates is that text remains the same when it's in the street and when it's in the gallery. That's shorthand for what he talks about. But I wondered what happened when you mix it as material. And some of the artists completely destroyed the text. Some of them amplified different parts of it. He told me once, sat in a golf cart, that he quite enjoyed it. So that's, I think I'm good. I think I'm good with Lawrence. This, normally I don't talk about this, but I wanted to kind of point to some of what I've done in the past as an artist. And I guess how, in many senses, it touches upon a curatorial position in relation to the presentation of an exhibition. I think many artists that I look at, from Mark Leckey to Jeremy Deller to Francis Starr, or I've worked with, do take or act in many ways as editors or as curators as such. They kind of filter information and present it in ways that many curators do. And I was interested in this kind of crossover, or this kind of engagement with this kind of administrative role as an artist as well. This is the gallery that I used to show with, called MOT International. This is a show called Prop Makers. And in essence, I worked with a scenic backdrop painter who'd worked on Troy and the Da Vinci Code, and now does Ridley Scott's films. And I asked him to create certain different backdrops, and then I invited artists to create props, such as this lovely cat by the artist Colin Lowe. So there were rooms and rooms of these racks, which they have in prop stores. I went to Elm Street, where I worked there actually a little bit, kind of painting backdrops for films such as, anyway. Brick Lanes and Da Vinci Code. But I saw all these props, and I was really fascinated in what it meant. I don't know, there was some kind of charge element to this spear that I'd seen Brad Pitt thrown on screen at this huge stage, but it was just their prop. So I was in some way thinking about it. It was a show where it talked about, it was critical of this idea, maybe, of curators using artists to illustrate their own ideas as prop makers, essentially. There was a lot of that happening in London at the time, and it kind of what we called address book curating. So there was always 80 artists in the show. The only person you ever remembered was the name of the curator. It was like Pyramid Sales or something. And there were so many of those shows, and I just felt it was a kind of disservice to artists. So I kind of pushed that somewhat cynically. You can do that in London, I like it. And kind of overstated that relationship. That basically these art objects were props for my ideas around spectacle and filmmaking. The Thinking, this is a project that I worked on with an artist, John Russell, who we saw earlier. This was a show at PS1 MoMA. And we were invited to be part of a show called Romantic Detachment, which was basically about kind of Anglo-American relations culturally. We were really fascinated by this LA filmmaker called Damon Packard, who's kind of, I guess, kind of an underground figure in terms of filmmaking. Damon's quite interesting. He makes trailers, but the trailers are like 3 hours long. So they become films. They're incredible. He has this incredible ability, and they're so quick in the edit, and he's very aware of music. So he's an incredible music editor, but they seem to be this kind of twisted version of the America we'd read about in the back pages of comic book novels as kids somehow. And he was like this kind of embodiment of some version of what appealed and what was scary about Hollywood. So we got in touch with him and we asked him if we could make a film with him in 2 weeks at PS1 MoMA. So we met with Damon on Sunset Boulevard. We talked about what we do. We thought, we're going to screen 24/7 his movies, and we're going to respond to them. We thought about how we'd respond to them, and we thought we'd make paintings in relation to all of his films. We would have a therapist who would sit there and would talk us through our response to the movies in relation to what might be happening with our romantic detachment to another culture seen through film. The project was called The Thinking. By the 5th day, we all had nausea and were vomiting. We found out later we had been poisoned by the kind of hotel apartment we'd been put in. There was a gas leak. Damon hadn't been seen for 4 days. We could see through the peephole in his hotel room that he was crashed out on the bed, and there was just a mountain of empty Coke cans and chip packets. And the museum was refusing to let us film there because of copyright, because of a Richard Archschwager lights outside the room. It was quite a lesson in terms of what I'd imagine PS1 MoMA to be in my experience in New York. That actually, as the chief, I won't mention his name, said, "This is not England. Here they sue." He was a French guy. So we were basically effectively told that we could have the camera, but we couldn't leave the premises, which was a catch-22. We couldn't film in the building, and we couldn't take the camera out of the building. So we were kind of like, whoa, this is really quite crazy. We had to, it was funny thinking about it. It seems like forever ago, but we had to show that all of our footage that we'd already taken had been deleted. So we had to sit with the director of PS1 and press delete on digital files that were already on our laptops, but it made. The footage is on YouTube somewhere. But we did this film. We did this kind of experiment. So we were locked in our room. People couldn't come into the room. Then we started doing the paintings. This happened. And then we were told that people couldn't come into the room. So we were effectively just shut down to the point, and vomiting and whatever else. And we kind of ended up in this very peculiar... I blank a lot out what happened on those 2. But I think something happened that was of interest. Damon eventually turned up, filmed some part of it, disappeared for 6 months, and then 6 months later I had this DVD through the post with one menthol cigarette in a packet crushed with it, and he'd made this film called Lost in the Thinking, which is essentially the kind of Spinal Tap of art, and we were Derek Smalls characters, and he's the one I like anyway. But and it won the best mockumentary at Berkeley, so there you go. So it was kind of good. So it's a very strange kind of idea of collaboration, but yeah, I did a number of collaborations like that with John and other people. But then I was invited, and here we go, we got 30 minutes left to get to what I actually do. Invited to New York to work with Creative Time, which is a public art organization in the city. It's 20, no it's not. The director's been there 20 years. I think it's 35 years young. Isn't that what they say? 35 years. It's been around for a long time, and it's kind of one of the first not-for-profit arts organizations there, predominantly concerned with public art. This was one of the first projects I did when I got there. I've been in New York 8 years. So I was really getting to know New York a little bit, and I wasn't interested in overt statement as such. That's the wrong way of describing it. But I like these kind of art as these kind of glancing blows on the architecture. There's a horrific term called archipuncture that I've taken out of my vocab. Art language is sometimes very ugly. But a kind of glancing relationship to the city. So I, myself, and the other curator, David Platzker, I gave a talk. Worked on this show. 6 actions. The 6th didn't happen because one of the artists was ill, but the 5 that did, this is an Adrian Piper piece called Everything Will Be Taken Away. We basically invited people in New York to have this phrase hennaed on their forehead. If anybody's ever used henna, it could last up to a month. So they live for a long time with this statement. But it's written in reverse, and it can only be read when they looked into a mirror. And whenever they looked into the mirror, Adrian asked that they write a kind of blog or diary entry about what that phrase meant to them. It's quite incredible how many, 300 odd people got involved. Somebody got married, forgot about it, got married with it on. Somebody lost their job at McDonald's, but then found their best job at a bookstore. It was this kind of strange way of thinking or framing text, I think. Project by Gelatin, Austrian group, 4 artists from this group, Gelatin, and they basically said, you can get us in a studio, but we want the best studio in New York to work for the summer, and there's no better place than to hang out on Coney Island Beach for 4 weeks. So they spent 4 weeks on Coney Island Beach digging the largest hole possible that 4 guys can dig, and then at the end of the day, they would fill it in. So it was this kind of, but really it was about them just communicating with, it became this weird site where lots of people have their wedding photos taken on Coney Island Beach. So people would come and chat to them. It was really a kind of work of the imagination that allowed them to hang out and to talk about what they might not be doing. So as a kind of focus, an idea as a focus, an activity, a performed activity. There's a lot of people in the hall. Spartacus Chetwin, who's now called Marvin Gaye Chetwin. She keeps changing her name, which I'm not sure what that's about, but she's always Lally to me. Her name's Lally. And so she did these kind of reenactments of key performances. This is Yayoi Kusama piece on Brooklyn Bridge. This is the critically acclaimed work. I think I wrote that. That's terrible, but it was critically acclaimed. This is a piece by Javier Tellez. It's based on a parable where a number of blind people experienced an elephant and all describe different things. So one person grabs the legs and thinks of tree trunks, another one grabs the wings and thinks of huge bats. It's basically about looking at one subject with not enough information or a certain kind of sense and arriving at a different conclusion. We staged it as a performance at the McLaren swimming pool in Brooklyn. People could watch it from a distance, and then it became a film called Letter on the Blind for Those That See, and it was in the Whitney Biennial, maybe 2008, perhaps. But Javier was great to work with, and it was, it was quite a powerful project. in many ways, just kind of description of the unseen. Like after each of these people who are actors or not actors, or people who just wanted to kind of experience what an elephant was. It was quite incredible. So we would speak to them afterwards. But in a way, it was about them talking about how they're viewed how they imagine that they're viewed as well within the city of New York. He was incredible. He'd had a kind of, he was dead for like 3 hours with this operation. It was like, and he'd come back, and he talked about his experience of that. He'd lost his sight. Okay, the voice. Shall I skip through this? Possibly. So this is a project called Hey Hey Glossolalia. That's a very long-winded title. Glossolalia is speaking in tongues. And I was interested in the idea of a curator as one that speaks through others. Speaking in tongues is used as a kind of evangelical term, I guess. My mother speaks in tongues. And you're given a message that's in a garbled or other language, and then somebody interprets it. It's something that culturally happens, the ritual throughout many kind of religions, for want of a better word. But I'm thinking of how different voices speak and what they suggest and how they talk about what they do and their ideas. This was the first event. It was at the Judson Church Hall. This is Liam Gillick, and the event was called The Eroticism of Pedagogy. I was really into big, clunky titles. And the Eroticism of Pedagogy. So I was thinking about what the voice does in relation to like teacher, student, and how that kind of relationship happens in terms of the Aristotle idea, where he would always ask that there was a curtain drawn between him and his audience so that they would focus on the voice. So he was actually, the visual gets in the way of thought, was his idea. Times have changed a little bit, but I was interested. So the Eroticism of Pedagogy, these two very handsome men, Liam Gillick, Teodad Zogdir, actually invited their students at Bard to write and tell them what they thought the Eroticism of Pedagogy. And they wrote some very funny, somewhat critical things about the two tutors they had. This is Adam Pendleton, a piece by Ryan Gander and Bedwyr Williams, where they stage these short vignettes about different products, fake products. This is Frances Stark, who just talked about her experience teaching at a California college. A work by Carey Young called Toastmasters, or Speechcraft. And basically, she worked with Toastmaster groups who are kind of corporate societies who are trained to speak eloquently about any subject that they're given. They're quite incredible. I went to a few of them. It's amazing how they, I feel like the art world, I could learn from these people. And they were invited to talk about different objects: Revolution tea, English breakfast tea, downhill cigarettes, a MoMA rubber ball that was made in China, a CNN stress toy. These objects are these kind of lefty, critical, could be. So she asked corporate America to talk about lefty ideas, I guess, is what she did. And they did it incredibly well. It was at the law courts in New York. This was another project in the series, Hey Hey Glossolalia, by an artist called Chris Evans. It's called Cop Talk. And he's done this in Amsterdam, in Britain, a number of countries. And this is the first in America. It's at Pratt University, or Pratt Institute. And it's basically a recruitment lecture by cops to art students. His theory being that the law enforcement might be helped by some liberal ideas, but also that 96.3% of art students never go on to carry an art career, which is both horrifying and very real. They were so charming. It was very. The idea was that there might be some kind of confrontational feeling between the law enforcement and students, but actually in the end it was kind of these two forces that had not met and actually talked about how they felt about each other. This was a talk at the New Museum with an artist called Riga 23, who I've worked with often, who's based in San Francisco, Portuguese artist, and Robert King Wilkinson, who's a member of the Angola Three, who was released from jail, accused of a murder that he was subsequently repealed, but he was in solitary for 29 years in Angola prison. And I'd met Robert through Rigo. They worked together, they campaigned together. And there was a phrase that Robert kept saying to me when I said, how did you survive in prison for 32 years, 29 of those solitary? He said, the deeper they bury me, the louder my voice became. And this kind of resonated with me a lot as a term. So I asked him just to talk through his experience of the voice in jail. So that was at a new museum, one of the lectures. This is a concert event at another ethical society, New York Ethical Society. I'm interested in those spaces because as a kid, there were places that you could go and do concerts at, but also anybody could hire them. There was a kind of openness to different ideas. So whenever I can, I try to use ethical societies to present work. This was an event called After Mercedes McCambridge, the voice after Mercedes McCambridge. Mercedes McCambridge was the voice of The Exorcist. She produced that voice by smoking 30 cigarettes in 2 hours and gargling egg yolks, and the devil came forth. But in the film, they took a name off because they wanted it to suggest that actually the devil had appeared. And she contested this for many years, and finally they put a name back on it. But I monstered somehow in culture. This is Genesis Bray Porridge, who had to kind of flee Britain for certain law cases that were written off after time. But it was how kind of people respond to different voices, different kind of styles or ways of presenting self. I'm going to flip through this. This is Ram LZ, who did this incredible lecture to one of his graffiti paintings. 36 minutes in. I'm going to speed to this. This is another Mark Leckey lecture at the Guggenheim. This World and Nearer Ones. Wow. Okay, Governor's Island. This is the last project I did with Creative Time. It was a large 20-plus person artist show on an island that was formerly a military base, bequeathed back to the city by Clinton for $1. It was sold back to the city, and then it's subsequently been opened up as a kind of public space. They talk about it as the Central Park of Hudson Bay. So this was the first big art show that was there. You experienced it through walking around, cycling around. This is a piece by Teresa Margolis. We transplanted a wall from her hometown in Mexico that had been the scene of a drugs killing. So all these bricks are kind of sprayed with bullets. And in short, I guess she was kind of overlaying one of the leisure activities of New York with this new idea of the island as a leisure activity. So in the midst of this kind of colonial beauty was this kind of wall that was this scene of a kind of drugs crime. Anthony McCall, Peace in the Church. Large Wind Chime by Klaus Weber. This was tuned to a minor chord, minor D chord, which was called the Devil's Chord in classical music, and you weren't allowed to play this in church. It was kind of sacrilegious. But it's also the opening chord to Gibson's and Jimi Hendrix All Along the Watchtower. It comes up a lot in popular culture. So this wind chime played this kind of deathly music. And a lot of the artists had visited this island in the bleak midwinter. It looks like somebody upped stakes and just left. It's like a set from The Walking Dead, which I saw here. Amazing. I'm so glad I came. That was my highlight. Incredible. But the island looked kind of like that, and then subsequently they've done a lot of filming on there. So I think a lot of the artists responded to this ghost town that was just off Wall Street. The recession had just happened. Bush was still doing his thing. And there was a kind of general sense of melancholia, but maybe it was because I hit 40 around that time, I don't know. But a lot of the works were kind of dark in tone. This is called Isle of the Dead by Bruce Psychology Foundation. And it was basically a pop video they shot for the summer of '69. That's Bryan Adams, right? So it's this kind of, it was looking at how New York sells itself, history that is way old, through Patti Smith, through Lou Reed, and how these younger entities come there, and that city is long since gone. So they walk the dead paths of former culture, and how they're trapped as zombies within this culture, which I think was quite interesting, and why most of them have moved to Philadelphia or wherever else that they can afford to be. But this was a kind of zombie film they made with like 300 artists, friends of theirs from Brooklyn. All the kind of zombies moved towards this cinema theater space and kind of stood up and sang Summer of '69, this kind of, bitterly melancholic. It's a piece by Niels Norman. I always forget the title. Temporarily Permanent Monument to the Occupation of Pseudo-Public Space. So at the time, it was about the kind of a suggestion of the lack of public protest. I think 6 months after that, Occupy Wall Street happened. So it was a kind of weird mirroring that I'm sure he's claimed in many lectures as being a very smart, astute guy. This was a piece by Edgar Arsenault, Sound Cannon Double Projection, and it was basically speakers that set out very low sub-bass sounds that basically destroyed certain of the buildings. With the history of the island, the spaces that were being kept were all the colonial big houses and the houses of the foot soldiers. And I can see where they did it, but I think in terms of history, it's always the colonels, the governors that are recognized, but the people that got out there and did it aren't recognized so much. So this was in one of the colonial houses. We didn't quite know how much it would destroy the building because they were going to try and keep it. Anyway, it did. But when you walked in there, you actually felt physically sick after about 3 minutes. Insular actors are in Quinto. They came along and they threw a brick through one of the windows. Skip that. Okay, Lawrence Wiener. I work with Lawrence quite often. And this is a piece called At the Same Moment. So when you're on the ferry, at each docking point was this same text, at the same moment. So it's a suggestion of connecting the histories of the island. This was, this was a great piece to do. The slide isn't going to tell you anything about it. But I invited Patti Smith to record and write a kind of guide to the island or the show. Do whatever she wants, basically. I just thought I didn't want to do this interpretive. Number 3, you will see an old building used by whatever. I was kind of interested in a kind of poetic relationship to the island, and it struck me that Patti Smith was so kind of tuned into the history of New York and beyond. So she wrote with her daughter a 12-minute song that was about the island that you could listen to and wander around. It was kind of non-directed. Basically, it was all about non-direction. It was about you doing what you wanted to do. So I moved to Performa in 2009. And one of my first projects was working with an artist who's probably most key to my thinking over time, Mike Kelley. And we presented a piece in Judson Church. It's called Judson Church Horse Dance. Obviously, there was the history upstairs in the main building of key avant-garde dance work, as well as musicians had performed there. And Mike was interested in that history, but how some of that kind of avant-garde form connected with American vernacular college theatre groups or dance groups, how a lot of these things actually happened in street or popular culture. So he did this Judson Horse Church dance. We have these kind of two horses that basically, when they're in horse costume, you're like, oh, it's a couple of pantomime horses. When they take the costume off, what they do is actually very close to avant-garde dance. So it's this kind of mirroring of form, I guess. Many of his images come from college yearbooks. He's been collecting them for many years, so he finds images that appeal to him. They're either of like dudes dressed up as thugs or Dracula or vampires or girls in Heidi outfits, and he kind of animates those photographs and makes real-time theatre vignettes using these images that exist. And the whole series was called Days Done. Ultimately, it would have been a project for every day of the year. You can see there's a video he did do, which is a 4-hour TV documentary. I think it's not documentary, it looks like documentary. Like a TV weird soap that was basically filmed at CalArts. You can buy and look at that. But at Judson Church, he did 3 new versions of Days Done. and then some of the other pieces. So we had like a 12-piece brass band. What else did we? This was kind of Mike himself doing a performance piece where he welcomed all the New York dignitaries dressed in a flowery bonnet, mainly the New York Times writers who he had a special love for. This is the music show that we put together called The Fantastic World, based upon reality. I'm really going to bump through this. But that year, 2009, the theme was futurism. And we were speaking with Mike, and he talked about the intonatura, the noise instruments, futurist noise instruments, and how Mike thought he could trace his interest in music from them through to industrial noise or kind of LA noise, experimental musicians. So he basically asked him to present his DNA in music over 2 days in this festival. Fantastic World Superimposed on Reality is a phrase from the Art of Noise manifesto. So these are the intonatura instruments. It's kind of very creaky, groany. They're meant to replicate the sounds of the city. We went through Fluxus, violin piece, to this Nivea piece. Yeah, I'm going to bump through these. This is Steve Reich classic piece, Swinging Pendulum. So it's kind of early minimalist music, improvised music, John Zorn, improvised piece. And he was basically looking at noise music or experimental music before it was termed noise. So he was interested in music before it became genre, at the point that it wasn't defined. And for him, he felt it became defined in the mid-'80s. So it started to become a proper, improper sound. I don't know, somehow he had a problem with genres or something. But I think in terms of the avant-garde, it was all about avoiding genre. Thurston Moore and his group, improvisers, Tony Conrad, amazing percussionist called Zev, Arto Lindsay did this incredible guitar piece, Genesis Parage performed with the Majesty. And we had key pieces like, this is Two Gongs, presented by a young composer called Alex Waterman. And then Mike presented a work by, Rodney Graham, which was a kind of fictional work placed in history. It's called Lobbing Potatoes at a Gong, 1967. So it's kind of faked in terms of when it would have been. So Mike did this incredible performance where he lobbed potatoes at a gong for 25 minutes and nearly cleared the whole auditorium. This is a guy from a band called Half Japanese, who are pretty incredible, around the same time as Throbbing Gristle band, and a guy called Lumberob, Joan LaBarbera, who I've worked with often, who's a kind of chief, I guess the last member of an avant-garde vocal female history, one of them. Shelley Hirsch. And then the first time that Destroy All Monsters had played in New York to end the second day of the concert, Jim Shaw appeared on Skype, which we were all freaked out about because Skype often glitches, but miraculously he appeared on screen throughout. The three of them were there. Okay. Yeah. 10 minutes, another 300 slides. Let's go. It's a piece by Arto Lindsay. Many performance projects. There's different tiers, I guess. There are main commissions, which would be Mike's and this by Arto Lindsay, which is a parade with a cell phone composition down Broadway from Times Square. This was another commission work by Francis Stark called Put a Song in Your Thing. Interested in... Has this gone off? No. Called Skerritt Boy, who developed a certain style of dancing called daggering, which is this kind of quite sexualized dance move, I guess. He's subsequently given it up in favor of following the church, actually, which was kind of another interesting story. But met on a plane, she became obsessed with him. She wanted to dagger him instead and reverse the kind of gender roles. He was totally up for that. So we kind of staged this big performance event with a big sound system. And Frances brought out all her cheerleader moves. Who'd have known? I didn't know she was a cheerleader, but she was pretty incredible. So we did this kind of 50-minute theatre piece. It was all about them two meeting for the first time on stage. Key work by Robert Ashley called That Morning Thing that we staged at the Kitchen. First staged in 1964. So this is 2011. I organized a comedy club. I was interested in comedy and how that connects with certain conceptual artists that I've been interested with or in over time. So he ran a comedy club in Times Square called Performa. This is Reggie Watts, incredible. Dina Seiden, Jason Musson, who I was speaking to, we were Slinker, we were talking about. Jason, so Jason's that character Hennessy Youngman that's on YouTube. It's so over now. It's so 2012. Anyway, Jason's incredible. So he presented a lecture on performance as the character Hennessy Youngman. This is an artist I work with very often called Bedwyr Williams, who we found on that road show many years ago when the tent was on fire. He turned up. He had a cell phone and called the fire. Anyway, it's amazing how you stick with certain people in your life. So he had also a kind of comedy lecture about performance called Methodist to My Madness, where he talked about his experience as a performance artist being asked to change in the director's offices often while they're having meetings with somebody else, and how embarrassing it is for a 6'5" man and to his smalls while the director asks him to sign the W9. Incredible lecture. All right. So this is a series. I'm really racing through these things, and you can ask me broader questions because I guess this is just a weird show and tell at the moment. So Performa runs a radio station. I've organized 3 of those. This was WNYC's Green Space. So it's broadcast as well as having a live audience. This is an artist called Mariam Vitali, who did a whole presentation from the position of a buffalo, or a kind of fiction from the position of a buffalo. Piece by Nathaniel Mellors, an incredible young artist called Jace Clayton, a musician as well, called DJ Rupture. He did a piece about a black composer that he was kind of very interested in. All right, whoa, we're up to 2013. I nailed this. That's brilliant. That's good. This is a piece by Florian Hecker, who's now based in Edinburgh, but a German artist. And he's somebody who's interested. He comes out of Berlin club culture, has kind of made work with people in the music world, so like Aphex Twin or Russell Haswell, but also presents, I think is possibly the key noise artist of the moment. So he did a piece at the Guggenheim called CD, a script for synthesis, and it was a kind of very hard to define, but it was this whole performance that was focused upon the unfocusable, or the thing that one could never describe fully. So it was a pink ice cube that melted over time. So it was this kind of composition for voice and for speakers and for electronics that asked everybody to focus upon the unfocusable that disappeared. He works with Reza Negrestani, who wrote the libretto for the piece. And we staged that over 3 nights, I think. So there are different elements. So Joan LaBarbera choreographed the singers. The costumes were by a Swiss designer that had some connection to Reza Negrestani in the text. It's very involved. Okay, maybe these are the last few, which is good. So as I said, my main focus for the 10 years, and somehow I've managed to find situations where I'm at, where I can still pursue this interest, which I think is rare. I think normally as curators you're asked to next thing. But somehow I was really aware. Early on somebody said to me, and I think it was a Graham Greene quote, general knowledge is the knowledge of idiots, which sounds very harsh. But it stuck with me, and I was like, I really want to get into something. I really want to focus on something. So it was about the voice. So I focused upon the voice for many years. And this, I guess, is the last iteration of some of those elements drawn together. So I did 3 different concerts, voice is the original instrument, in tones from light to dark, and To Breathe Is Not Enough. Again, at the Ethical Society, voice is the original instrument. This is a piece by Meredith Monk. And they were concerts that looked at different aspects of the voice. This was about key female vocalists who basically invented extended vocal technique in the 60s and 70s. So this was a piece by Meredith Monk. And then a younger generation from Norway. This is Maya Rapka, vocal artist. And then Jonah Barbara, who made this album called Voice is the Original Instrument, where it's just her voice, and she developed all these forms of extended vocal technique that you can hear now. They kind of get picked up in pop music. So like Whitney Houston used extended vocal technique, melisma. That's what auto-tune kind of generates. Or somebody like DJ Screw, when he slows stuff down, they're also extended vocal techniques. And I kind of liked it as a form because it's never ending and there are many things that can add to it. It's like a history that isn't over, which I think is of interest. This was From Light to Dark. This is a Norwegian artist called Jenny Wahl, currently touring with the Swans, I think, but she does a very interesting take on extended vocal technique and pop lyric. This is Stina Motland and C. Spencer Yeh, both a kind of younger Norwegian and American practitioners in terms of extended vocal technique. This is, and this kind of ended the concert. So it started with pop music, went through the avant-garde, and ended up with black metal music. This is Attila Cesar, he used to be the lead vocalist with the band Mayhem. And he does this kind of very intense, deep, occultish kind of use of language and ritualized language. It's also super theatrical. It wasn't that far from Kiss, which I like. There were all these dudes, they were like literally horns that had been placed as implants. Like, and it's like, oh, this is my audience. It's really good. He was, of course, he was the sweetest guy all day. No prima donna activity. He was great. This is a performance, again, vocally, with Zena Schreck, who's the daughter of Anton LaVey, who formed the First Church of Satan in California. Zena's kind of incredible and does these kind of vocal incantations. It's interesting in at what point a performance becomes ritual and how these things kind of cross over. And when I played some of her music to Joan, she was like, I made music like that in the 70s, and how these things kind of interconnect, and not to kind of deny their similarity aesthetically, but also sometimes what they're suggesting. So this was Zena. Last voice piece, again by a Norwegian artist. The Performa has different focuses each year. And last time we had like national pavilions. There's a Polish pavilion and a Norwegian pavilion. And I predominantly programmed the Norwegian pavilion. In the main, because when I went there, I found that a lot of young artists and visual artists, musicians were all very interested in the use of voice. And they looked at a lot of these kind of American 70s female vocalists and were kind of name-checking them as progenitors for what they'd done. This is Turi Ranes, and she kind of physically challenges herself and the voice and puts herself in different positions, and does a kind of what she terms a visual concert. So this is her hung upside down, singing for 5 minutes before blacking out, which is always worrying. This is my last slide. This is kind of brings me up to date and where I'm at early in the year. It's very grand calling it a lecture tour, but why not? It's a self-organized tour, basically. And this stemmed from a text that I'm working on as part of the, well, will become a book, I guess, that looks at the kind of history of avant-garde vocal form and how now we see that as a standard in Beyonce or Kanye or whatever passes for pop now, but how they're, yeah, how that conversation happens and how they're not actually as separate as one imagines. So I did a lecture where I looked at, it was a vinyl lecture, so I was going to bring vinyl today, but it's a good job I didn't, because I'm bang on 1 hour. Yes, good. So that's me. There was a lot. Thank you for listening. That was good. That was good.